You've reached the Signal Watch, movies, television, comics, and more. I'm your host, Ryan Steens. Join me and our cadre of co-contributors as we examine cultural artifacts of the 20th century, boldly explore the 21st, and try to put it all in perspective. Stay tuned. We're gonna try to make this work. Hey everybody, and welcome to a special 4th of July edition of The Signal Watch. As always, I'm your host, Ryan Steens, and with me today are...
Simon Day, hello again.
And...
Jamie Steens.
And we are here to talk about what?
Jaws.
1975, directed by Steven Spielberg, and starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. No, only joking. Starring Robert Shaw.
That would be a very different movie.
Yeah. I punched the shark in the face.
Get to the boat.
49 millimeter. Robert Shaw, Roy Schneider, Richard Dreyfuss, Lorraine Gary, and Murray Hamilton.
So this is a movie. If you've probably seen it. It's about a shark who is not allowed to just eat in peace. That's, I think, really the plot of the movie.
That's the takeaway.
I read this thing yesterday. Somebody did a joke where they said, if you play the film backwards, it's about a shark that keeps throwing up people until they're forced to open the beaches.
Yeah, I mean, so that's kind of the plot in a nutshell, reverse. But it's interesting to watch here in this time of a pandemic. There have been a ton of memes about
So that's interesting, because I was about to say, I read an article yesterday, and actually Stephen, my friend who I play tennis with, he mentioned it, I think, back on Monday, because for Father's Day he watched Jaws and a couple of other movies. He actually had a great Father's Day lineup. It was like Thunderball, Jaws, Hot Fuzz. It's like real dad films. But he was saying, yeah, the first half of Jaws is basically weirdly, what we're going through at the moment, really.
Oh, yeah.
Well, and when we were all watching it the first time, we thought, what a bunch of dum-dums.
Yeah.
Not listening to the scientist.
Yeah.
That would never happen.
And they kind of say we're going to close the beach, but only for 24 hours. Then we're going to open it up again,
Yeah, I mean, it was and the eventual, like, he's mumbling to himself, the mayor, as he's signing the order to actually do the right thing. And he's clearly, he still hasn't reconciled it, but he knows in his head he has to do it. He's like going through this whole thing of wondering what his legacy is going to be and all of that. But it isn't until it's impacted his kids, right? My kids were on that beach too, right?
And Brody has this great line when that's happening. He says, if we make an effort today, we might be open by August.
Yeah. Well, it's weird though, because I think the thing is Murray Hamilton plays it so well. And I think the character's actually got more levels than we give it credit for, because there's been so many films that have had ripped that off since, like Alligator or Piranha, where it's just like some idiot official going like, keep the swimming pool open or whatever. So I think we've kind of like, it's almost like we've kind of pushed Murray Hamilton into more of a cliche than he was, because when I watch it now, the mayor's obviously wrong, but he is trying to think about the town, and he's just not, he's basically not thinking about people. and not thinking about individual victims. But I do think it's like a more nuanced performance than what followed in copies of Jaws. And there's a lovely little scene in Jaws 2, actually, which it's funny, all Jaws fans know it, even though it was cut out, where Brody gets voted out by the committee because, he shot up a beach. And the only one who doesn't vote in favour of him being fired is actually Murray Hamilton. And you kind of wish they'd have kept that in Jaws 2, because he's obviously learned his lesson.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's been all over Twitter for months at this point, of various clips, direct clips from the movie of officials making these choices that are going to end up impacting people, and we all know what happens in Jaws, and kind of the exact same thing. And of all weeks, this was the week that Texas, in particular, which had been aggressively trying to open, just rolled everything back. We are getting people off the beach right now, so to speak.
Well, my restaurant was supposed to open on the 1st of July, and yesterday they told me they're not going to. They reversed that. And straight away I thought about, we are going to be open 4th of July. This is going to be the best summer we've ever had. Don't do it.
Well, I think the very memorable scene with the mother who comes and confronts Brody after after her son has been eaten. She said, you knew this happened before and you didn't say anything, and slaps him across the face. Like, that really hit home this time.
Well, it's also interesting how the mayor tries to go, it isn't your fault, and Brody kind of says, no, it is.
Yeah, no, he takes responsibility for it. You can see it in his face. He feels that. He's like, I did the wrong thing. Like, even though I was kind of trying, I didn't try hard enough. I guess that's what he feels. He takes it on himself.
Yeah. Well, I was jumping ahead here a little bit, but I find it, yesterday I watched it again, and of course I know it off by heart, but I found incredibly refreshing the fact that, in this day of, Ray from Star Wars and Captain Marvel and Chris Pratt in Jurassic World, you've got 3 main characters who are all deeply flawed, because Quint's traumatized and probably an alcoholic, Hooper's arrogant and brash and thinks he knows it all, and then Brody's kind of guilty of getting this kid killed, and he also lacks confidence in his convictions. But they both have to wrestle with their demons to kind of, by the end of the film, and, some are successful, some aren't. But it's great just not having characters for a change who start off perfect and become more perfect.
Yeah, it's, I that's a whole separate podcast at some point, honestly. But, yeah, I mean, I was going to say only in the 70s would you have that, but that's not true. I mean, that would have been true in pretty much in film up until probably the last 15 years ago or 10 years ago, where we've really gotten into kind of this checkbox for your protagonist where, they're, I use that term fiction suit of, we can't have any flaws because that'll separate them from how the audience wants to think of themselves, getting dropped into the main character. It is very 70s in a lot of ways as far as how the storytelling works. There's a lot of things that Spielberg, and that's a positive, by the way, when I say it's very 70s. I think it's a great era of cinema, but Spielberg's coming out, hot off of Duel or something at this point. I'm not sure, it's
Sugarland Express as well. Which I think didn't make much money, but people liked it.
Yeah, and so this was the thing that broke him. I mean, this is the thing. When I was a child and this movie had come out, everyone knew this movie, and I grew up knowing the name Steven Spielberg because of this movie before in Close Encounters. And so, but there's the scene on the, we'll get into it later, but of the sitting around the table and comparing scars. But Roy Scheider never expressly says at any point in the movie what's really going on with Brody and why he left New York and what his real story is that he's kind of overcoming. I'm sure it's in the Peter Benchley novel.
Well, he has that line on Hooper's boat where he kind of said when he's drunk and he says, New York's so full of crime, it doesn't make a difference what you do, but in Amity, one man can make a difference. So it kind of sounds like there was corruption in New York or just too much crime.
Yeah, basically. And he clearly has the thing. I mean, they show it. They do the good thing of show, don't tell, where he basically, like, when they're comparing scars, lifts his shirt and he's about to talk about whatever happened to him and decides against it.
Although
I get the feeling he's been shot. Something happened to him in New York.
Well, apparently that's an appendix scar, though. I always thought. So that's the joke. The fact that his only scar is when he had his appendix out.
Oh, I've read that for 40 years as he'd gotten shot.
Yeah, I did too, because there's a look on his face like there is a deeper story there, but he just doesn't want to tell it. Like, and it's not a look of embarrassment like it would be with an appendix scar. I don't know. Maybe I just misread it.
Yeah, I could be wrong. I thought I heard Spielberg say that was it, but because that's the kind of joke. These guys have been like fighting barracudas and sharks.
Yeah,
and he's been safely on land. Yeah,
yeah.
The best scene. They're bonding.
But the movie's been like endlessly ripped off at this point. We were even watching a horror movie called Slithis last night, which I highly don't recommend.
Don't watch it. Don't do it.
It was like a 1978 like zero budget attempt at a creature feature, but the end of it ends with them like deciding they're going to go out on a boat to go look for this thing, and it's clearly like we saw Jaws and wrote in this scene at the end.
Oh yeah,
and
a bunch of unqualified people, by the way.
Yeah,
they're not like the cop and
it's a high school teacher and a tour boat operator.
Yeah.
This spawned so many copies. Not just Jaws 2 and its own sequels, but there's some hilarious. I think a couple of summers ago, Alamo Ritz had a Monsters from the Deep thing, and it was kind of a lead up to them showing Jaws again, but they had like the Italian version, which I think is called Great White, which actually got banned for years because Universal said that's way too close to Jaws. But it had like James Franciscus was basically the Brody, and then it had I think Vic Moreau with a terrible Irish accent was trying to be Quinn, and it was hilariously. It was like it was almost like if you want to do like a Halloween version of Jaws. So some people had no shame, but even Piranha and stuff. Tips his hand and stuff. Yeah.
So, it's one of the most recognizable films probably of the past 50 years. We studied it when I was in film school, not as an actual film, but as kind of an event in kind of how movie going changed as this was the birth of the blockbuster. And I remember it vaguely from when I was very, very, very young. Like 3 or 4 years old. Everyone knew the theme. It was just kind of omnipresent. It was the first thing that I remember learning how to play on the piano, going, finding those two notes. And of course you're a kid, so you just do something over and over anyway. But
actually, Ryan, was it like this?
A little bit like that.
My little Jaws.
Oh, how cute! He's holding up a little toy Jaws.
I have a toy Jaws too, but it's upstairs. Actually, I have 2 toy Jaws, but they're upstairs.
Can we talk about the score for just a second?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. And this is nothing that has not been said before, but how brilliant the score is, and I wonder if this would have been as successful without the soundtrack, because that theme is basically playing the role of the shark for about 3/4 of the movie. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because you don't see it.
Mm-hmm. No.
And it's so effective.
Well, also,
when I was a little kid, I did not see this movie when I was a child. I was an adult before I actually saw the movie. But there is video of me as 4 years old, and my older brother and my much older cousins are goading me to sing the Jaws theme. And so I was basically just running around in circles going, na 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 Jaws. And that is like my only memory. And this would have been in 1979. And that's like 4 years after the original came out.
Mm-hmm.
So it was still going on at that point.
Oh, yeah. You couldn't go to the beach. You couldn't go to a lake. I mean, every time I went to the lake, my grandfather, my dad's father lived on a lake in Missouri. And so there's not sharks in Missouri. I'm not like dissing Missouri. Missouri's fine. But my brother would be like, Jaws is under the water there. And you'd just be like, I know that's not true, but now it's in my head. But yeah, but you talk about the blockbuster impact, like after this is when Hollywood went from kind of going, we'll make something and kind of hope we have a big event to, okay, let's work backward from what made Jaws an event and try and figure out how to recreate that. But basically all they ever figured out was you put Steven Spielberg behind the wheel and you'll probably make a mint.
Well, this is also like, I think John Williams' kind of golden period, somewhere between Jaws, probably up until, I don't know, somewhere in the 80s or maybe early 90s.
I mean, Schindler's List was 94. He was still going. And then he did all the Harry Potter movies after that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's just, I suppose I'm trying to say in that period, he just seemed to knock out of the park every one, like Superman, Close Encounters, Raiders. And it's like you were saying, I definitely, totally 100% think this wouldn't be as successful without the music. Because you're right, the shark wasn't working for most of the film. And apart from using, when the pier collapses with the two guys on it, or the yellow barrels, or, Tippett's stick, this is the only other way of showing that the shark's around. And Williams is really clever as well, because if you watch it, they play the theme every time the shark's attacking, but then they'll also have underwater footage, like when it's the two kids with the paper fin, the cardboard fin. They'll have an underwater shot of legs, but they won't play the music. So subconsciously you're like, oh, something's off here. Maybe it's not the shark. But then later on, when Brody's chumming, he'll flip it and have the shark appear without any music. So it's great.
Yeah, that is one of the jump scares in the movie. Definitely.
And there's also
that and the dead guy appearing in the boat.
Yeah, yeah.
That always scares the bejesus out of me, even though I've seen it.
And the rest of the score is amazing as well. Like, when they're trying to tie the line on before he shoots the yellow barrel. And also, I think it's called Tourist on the Menu, when Brody's and Dreyfus are trying to organize stuff. So on the phone, and you see all the tourists arriving. And it's got that. It's like a great score. You've got the sea shanty thing for the orca. Mm-hmm. When they're driving the boat really fast. It's really cool.
Yeah, it has this interesting, the sea shanty sort of adventure theme that plays over it, that kind of keeps it from ever also dwelling too much on the kind of minor chords of kind of getting down into every second of this is scary and depressing. It's
it keeps it energized. Mm-hmm. They're going after this man-killing shark, and that could get a little grim.
Yeah, and it makes it more exciting than it makes it heavy is the head that has to go kill the shark. And I mean, they play that scene, but it's really through what you see through. By the way, we made fun of Lorraine Gary a lot when we talked about Jaws 4.
Deservedly so. Deservedly.
She's really good in this. You can see how she got cast.
She is. I love the scene where the boys are going and playing it. They're in the boat, and Brody's just screaming at them to stop. She's like, "Let them have their fun. It's his birthday or whatever." And then she's looking at the book of what the shark is doing to the boat. She says, "Michael, get off of the boat."
But yeah, she has that great moment with Roy Scheider just before he leaves on the Orca, and it's a powerful scene. She doesn't have to do or say much; it's all just acting. No,
she's really good, and the dinner scene with Hooper as well,
mm-hmm.
where he's can I talk to you? You know, I'd like to talk to your husband. And she's like, me too. Yeah, I mean, I think she's like very underappreciated in this. Same as Murray Hamilton. Just because the main three guys are so strong, and all of them kind of really kind of eat up the screen. I mean, especially like Robert Shaw is just like chewing the scenery. He's chewing the boat to bits, really. But I mean, yeah. I mean, I guess we could talk about that. I mean, so originally this was going to be Charlton Heston with his vest off, as Quinn. But I think
I want to live in the world where that was Preston.
But you know, if it was Charlton Heston, well, actually, I was going to say he'd blow up the shark, but he might actually in the 70s. Charlton Heston might die. He might have been eaten, actually, I guess. But there was going to be him. I know there was Sterling Hayden was going to be Quinn.
Oh my God, that would have been amazing. I mean, I love Robert Shaw, but like you're just getting like insights into like, oh, that would have been a totally different movie. That would have definitely been a totally different movie.
Who can we get who's even more drunk than Robert Shaw? Timothy Bossoms was going to be Hooper, I think. Jeff Bridges was going to be Hooper, which would have worked, I think.
I can kind of see Jeff Bridges, but
it would have been different.
Yeah, I think Dreyfuss. I can't imagine Hooper's anyone but Dreyfuss.
Richard Dreyfuss just has this great thing of like, I'm the scientist and you all are a bunch of yokels. Like, which, I mean, to some extent, he's not wrong. I mean, you know, his great line of, they're all gonna die, you know, as he's watching them sail off. But
he comes in and has a big go at Brody at the start for basically not following procedure and not reporting it properly and letting the Coast Guard know. So he is like, you know, he's the kind of brash new experience, and Quint is the old school experience, and then Brody's kind of the normal guy in the middle. He's kind of us, really, just like going, I'm telling you my depth here. But it works so well, you know.
Yeah, and I know somewhat famously, Shaw just picked on Dreyfuss on the set the whole time he was there to make sure there was. I mean, you can say it was method acting. My guess is he probably really didn't like Richard Dreyfuss.
Richard has kind of laughed that off since. I think now he doesn't tend to badmouth Shaw. He kind of says, "Yeah, you know, we had our moments, but he was a great actor and stuff." But yeah, Robert Shaw used to say stuff like to Richard Dreyfuss, "You see that sail? You know, the highest sail on the Orca." He said, "When I was your age, I could climb up there, jump off there into water, but you can't because you're too fat." Richard Dreyfuss used to either try to do it or just get in a mood because he knew he couldn't do it.
I mean, it works really well because you get the impression these guys hate each other at the beginning of this movie.
Yeah, but I love the arc of how they do kind of bond, even though it stays antagonistic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
definitely the respect kind of grows. You know, because even like you know, when Hooper goes down in the cage, I think, you know, Brody's like, that shark's going to rip that cage apart. And, you know, and they kind of know it's probably a suicide mission, but they haven't got anything left to try. So
this time, for whatever reason, when I was watching it, I felt all of that a lot more. I think probably because I was watching Robert Shaw's character a whole lot more on this one and trying to kind of piece together, like, he both kind of puts up this bravado of I don't wear a life jacket because I don't, you know, you find out, you know, through the Indianapolis story, you know, why he wouldn't want to wear one. But there's that moment where he turns and looks at them and he's thinking about putting one on, right?
Yeah.
So he hasn't quite dealt with the whole, like, I actually am fine with my mortality, and, you know, but he's still at the same time doing things like destroying the radio.
Well, this is the thing, because he actually is so obsessed, so Ahab, like, that there's several times in this when he could have won, or at least got himself out of danger. Like, but he does smash the radio. He does run the boat until it blows up.
Mm-hmm.
So he's kind of like cornering himself into almost a head-to-head with the shark, which he's obviously going to lose.
Yeah, I think he wanted to be out there alone, and he's got these two people, and he does feel responsible for them. And I think that's when you see those moments of, I really, I have this desire to either die by the shark or kill the shark. But, oh, right, I do have these two guys I need to take care of. And they never put a life jacket on Roy Scheider. Chief Brody never puts on a life jacket. So,
I do like that bit where they give the crappy little pump to Brody, and he's like, "Pump it out, Chief." And Roy Schneider just kind of resignedly, resignatedly says, "We're sinking, aren't we?"
So something I was thinking about when I watched it this time. So earlier in the movie, Hooper has this really nice science boat that works.
Mm-hmm.
And yet they choose to take the shitty boat.
Well, yeah, that's who they've chartered. He's going to take his own boat.
Yeah, they've hired Quinn, haven't they? So
it just seems like a really bad idea.
I do think Hooper's boat is slightly smaller as well. So I don't know if it would work to catch or kill anything.
Maybe, but it's got like shark detecting equipment on it. I don't know.
Yeah, it was. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say with Hooper's boat, that's a great scene because it always reminds me a little bit of Aliens, or Jules reminds me of Aliens, or vice versa, where he's got the sonar detector, and Brody's drunk anyway, so he's not much use, right? But then, Hooper's like, "Oh, there's a big shape out there. I'm sure it's a school of like bluefish," and it's like, really, really. And he's like, "I'll go in the water, nothing's going to happen." And the first time you watch this, you're like, "Really?" And even Brody's going, "Let's just tow it in. Let's just tow it in." And it's like, yeah, that's such a good scene. Although that's the problem I have with it, Ben Gardner, because I'm like, how did the dude manage to drown and lose his eye and still be inside the boat? I'm like, that's a Columbo type mystery. Really, that doesn't make any sense.
Maybe a fish got it. I don't know, but it's a great scene, and that's the one. A lot happened in post production. Spielberg kind of famously had this editor whose name I do not have in front of me right now.
I think it's about Werner Fields, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like a lot of films you hear about like that, they'd shot this movie, went months over schedule and over budget, and they just had film. And she's really credited with making it actually come together as a film. And we don't talk enough kind of about that aspect of filmmaking. The editor, I'm not sure if it was shot in her pool, but she was the one who pointed out that they needed the sequence. And they shot either the under the boat sequence in Spielberg's pool or her pool. And I don't remember which.
Yeah.
But that whole sequence, you can't tell, which is funny because I watch the Wonder Woman TV show still, and reruns and on Blu-ray and whatnot. And they often have scenes of her jumping into the ocean, and they'll cut, and it's clearly her jumping into a pool somewhere. And you're just like, well, did this ever look like the ocean to people on 70s televisions? Like, but in that, they do such a good job of lighting it from the top that it's absolutely seamless in the film.
Well, I think Spielberg famously nearly got sacked every week from this because it went way over budget. And apart from the shark, the other big problem was his decision to film at sea, which of course, even now when you watch it, the sky never matches from shot to shot. And, and you can kind of tell they're just bobbing about in the middle of nowhere. I think they had to hide the land because they were actually pretty close to land. So they had to keep hiding that in shots. And of course, other boats were going past in the distance and stuff.
But it's still, it's impressive. Not to bring up Slithis again, the crappy movie we watched last night, but I did notice that they were obviously shooting this boat from another boat. And that cameraman must have been so seasick because it was just bobbing up and down. It just highlights how good the work was on this.
Yeah. I mean, in general, when old pirate movies and whatnot, and, they try and shoot not on the real water, just because it's so uncontrolled. But yeah, I remember hearing about that in that Jaws documentary about how they kept having shots ruined just because they were trying to get this scene, and then someone, tools by in a sailboat very slowly in the background. And they're like, we can't say no one can help them if there's a sailboat within, So.
Well, also the shark. So they were going to kill off Richard Dreyfuss's character as well, same as the book. Because in the book, the shark actually kind of squeezes into the cage and grabs him, which you kind of see the start of that in the film. Bends the bars and it's kind of nearly getting to him.
Well, it's a really good fake out in that way.
Yeah. I mean, but the only reason I think Dreyfuss survives in the film is they hired like a little person, like this midget, to go in the cage. So they made a smaller cage because they had footage of a 15-foot great white. And of course, in the film, it's supposed to be 25. But like, if you get a little person, it's going to look the same, right? So I think Ron and Valerie Taylor shot some footage in Australia. And they had the little guy with them, dressed up as Richard Dreyfuss, right? And he wouldn't go in the cage once he saw the shark swimming around. And, they were like, they tried everything, bribery, whatever, and he wouldn't go in a cage, which, quite wisely. Well, while this was happening, the shark got caught in the cage and smashed it to pieces. And that's the footage you have in Jaws of, that's a real shark, obviously smashing the cage to pieces. Yeah. But it's a miniature cage. And so because of that, they had to rewrite it so that, Dreyfuss got out and swam away. But I'm surprised Spielberg didn't use a monkey dressed as Richard Dreyfuss. Get a little denim jacket, glasses, or monkey dressed up as Hooper. But
I actually think it works because it gives the ending. It's not so depressing. I mean, obviously it's sad that we lose Quint, but then they're both riding off together into the sunset, and so it's. Yeah.
I think it makes the difference between Quint's death being meaningful and we get a good button on it, and they can swim off together and have their kind of gallows humor laugh as they swim back to shore, and that's how we get to end the movie, and we get to walk out feeling okay, versus a Roy Scheider sadly swimming back to shore and kind of going, what was that? At the end, which it could have easily been, right?
That's true. I mean, you do kind of think, where's Hooper been? But I guess he's just been hiding behind some coral for the last 5 minutes. But it's like, I mean, it definitely gives it that little lift you need. It's a much more Spielberg ending as well, But it's funny because, like, talking about that, so this was a PG, amazingly. And the reason they got away with that was they were like, well, there's no sex, there's no swearing, and basically the only violence is from an animal. So they managed to kind of get around it that way. Although I know they cut down a lot of the scenes. Like yesterday I was looking at images of the Alex Kidner scene, and it actually looked kind of terrifying because there's this big shark's head basically coming up and grabbing the yellow lilo. And the only reason they didn't use that, I think, was because the dummy looked really false that they had on the lilo. But that looked terrifying. And then I don't know if you guys have actually ever watched the cut stuff on the DVD, but there's an old scene of the estuary where the guy in the rowboat who gets knocked out and his leg gets bitten off. So there's another, that went on longer, where he's kind of in the shark's mouth, kind of like a bone in a dog's mouth, but he's upright. So he's like, ugh, and kind of getting dragged along. But he grabs Michael and kind of holds him as though like in a death grip. But at the last minute, he pushes him out of the way just as the shark takes this guy underneath. And it's very gruesome.
Oh, wow. The scene that's really effective to me and could have been really disgusting is the morgue scene.
Yeah.
Because of Richard Dreyfuss. Mm-hmm. Like he has such a reaction to, seeing this dead person, but is still trying to be professional about it. It moves the scene along, but you're there with him. Like it almost makes me nauseous just watching him and imagining what he's seeing.
Yeah.
His like asides of like, did you not do this? Did you not do that? As he's like freaking out.
Yeah. Can I have some water, please? That's like the only thing that he asks for. Yeah.
Do not smoke in here.
Right.
Well, there's so So there's kind of an urban legend, and I honestly can't remember myself, but a lot of people say out there somewhere that scene's a bit longer and you see more. Because when they find what's left of Christie on the beach, it's pretty obvious that the shark kind of bit her in half, kind of across the chest. So probably her head and one arm are still kind of attached. But of course, you know, when he holds up, you only see that quick shot. And there's some dodgy editing in that and on the boat later. It's funny because I think this won an Oscar for the editing, but there's some real jumps where you're like, you know, what happened there? Not that it spoils the film, but yeah, some people swear blind that they saw more in the autopsy scene when it was shown on TV originally, but I was too small. I can't remember.
I am betting that's one of those things of they think they remember that because of how Dreyfus was.
Yeah.
I mean, it's entirely possible, and those things do happen, you know, all the time. I mean, there's the 4-hour cut of the Superman movie that personally I didn't even make it through my own Blu-ray of it. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely, you know, Blade Runner kind of famously had all these different cuts, and people swear they've seen these different cuts with like unicorns in them and stuff. Yeah. But I would also believe people remember it because of the description Dreyfus is giving and the reaction he's having, and your brain probably fills in gaps saying, yeah, I mean, there was something on the table, but
yeah.
But it's also possible. So,
well, you kind of said you studied it for your film class.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm guessing you studied the shot on the beach, which it's funny because like Spielberg kind of stole that from Vertigo, but now people call that the Jaws shot, where it kind of pulls out from him, but then goes to a close up at the same time.
Yeah, mm-hmm. I can't remember if it's dolly out, zoom in, or zoom in, dolly out. I can't remember how you get that effect, but yeah, you have to have a focus puller at keeping the person exactly your point of focus in exactly in the center of the screen as you do that while the camera actually physically moves, but you're using a zoom lens to keep them where they're at. So the background like gets thrown basically in focus and in dimensions. And yeah, you see it occasionally, people trying for it. And I don't know how that would work. I'd have to ask someone who's working in digital film now. That was kind of an artifact of how cameras were working at that point.
That scene was so good anyway, with all the wipes of every time somebody walks past, it changes the perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, and all the false alarms, you know, that's some bad hat, Harry, you know. And also the guy, you know, the other councilman, like saying, you know, these guys keep, you know, parking in front of my office, you know, like all these people, he's like trying to look around them and like ignore them. It's really good.
Yeah, I can only imagine the reason Spielberg was able to really capture a lot of that kind of like how annoying how do I do this without getting fired? When you're in a position of responsibility, but you're also kind of middle management, is a really weird place to be. And I am now also an elected official of my HOA. I'll put it that way. So between those two things, and so you constantly have people kind of coming to you with their personal, you know, bugaboos of can't you do this? Can't you do that? It's so simple. And I can only imagine as a young director who had to be in charge of these, you know, various films before this, he could really be in that headspace and really capture I am trying to focus on something else right now. And these people are, you know, coming up to me and complaining about the karate school, you know, breaking fences and, you know, they stole the bike and, you know, all the other things you hear. He's like, I am trying to make sure no one, you know, gets eaten by a shark right now. And I understand those people are parking in front of your house, but
there's also, so I don't know if we mentioned it, but the color yellow, I read somewhere a few years ago that every time you see yellow in this, it's like the sign for danger. So that's why the Lilo and the barrels later.
And the float.
Yeah. And even like, you know, Mrs. Kidner's hat, because the yellow really stands out in some of those scenes just before an attack. Um,
I'm gonna call that an oranges from The Godfather. Of I just thought oranges were in the scene. Oranges somehow equal death. It's like, well, maybe.
It's like Jamie said earlier. The barrels are great though. The fact that they stand in for the shark so much, and and just the fact that Quint's like, it can't go down with 3 barrels on him. It can't go down, and then of course it goes down.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting sequence for Quint, as he's saying that line to himself, and when he sees it, like that's when you get like, oh my God, Robert Shaw is such a good actor. Like, yeah. You don't think of that in the moment. It's kind of in reflecting on it afterward. Of he kind of has this somewhat clunky line that he's having to repeat to himself, but you also see the kind of chill of fear of like, oh, I'm.
This is new territory.
Yeah. I don't know if I can handle this at this point. And that's when he starts, looking at life jackets and all that sort of stuff. And kind of has this kind of unspoken pivot inside of the film. I
mean, that's truly scary when the guy that's like, no life jackets, is bringing out the life jackets. Yeah. Like, he's at the end of his rope. Like, we're all going to die. That's
yeah, which leads directly into the shark cage sequence, right? Like they've gotten desperate.
Yeah,
we haven't talked much about kind of the kind of. Well, we've talked somewhat about leading up to it because it's the boat sequence is the film's kind of bifurcated into.
Well, it's exactly in half where it switches, isn't it, from like land to the adventure at sea, the hunt.
Yeah, and the we've talked a bit about but the Mrs. Kintner scenes, of course, she just passed. By the way, we're not only is it 4th of July, and not only is it pandemic, but the woman who played Mrs. Kintner passed just within the past couple of months.
She got a good career out of Jaws, though. She popped up in Jaws with Revenge, and I think she wrote a book about Jaws.
And apparently, she was an actual Amity Islander, right?
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, I think
so people would go to Amity and they'd run into her and she would slap them. That was her thing. She got to do that for the rest of her life.
Now, did they ask her to?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
She wasn't just going around slapping people.
No. So they'd be like, will you slap me? And she was always apparently happy to oblige. So
that's awesome.
I'd go up to her just wearing my swimming trunks and going, can I go in for another 10 minutes? Just another 10 minutes.
That actually brings up something I was thinking about this time when we were watching it. How it was very indicative of how parenting was in that era of, hey, we'll just let the kids go off and do their thing. Like the parents wake up in the morning like, where are the kids? They're out on the beach. I mean, but that would happen. Our parents used to do that all the time. Like, go play. And that would never happen now.
No.
If you didn't know where your children were at all times, like.
I mean, I spent days, I mean like 12 hours, sitting up a tree 10 miles away from my parents' house without any form of communication. If anything happened.
Yeah, we were 10 in the morning or so after breakfast. We were basically like, you're allowed to come back in for peanut butter and jelly for lunch, but aside from that, don't come in until the street lights come on, that sort of thing. And my mom literally bought like a dinner bell triangle that we could hear for about 2 blocks away. That was how we got summoned home at night for dinner when we were
like a huge gong. Bong.
Yeah, we'd be out playing baseball or whatever a couple streets over, and we'd hear the triangle, and everyone knew the Steens boys got to go home. Dinner time. So.
Well, we haven't talked about the Indianapolis speech. So I actually did this in an acting course. This was my choice of monologue. Of course, everybody else had, stuff from Boogie Nights and stuff from About Smith. And I was like, I was going to say, I'd love to say I turned up scratching on a blackboard going, you know me. But I did this monologue, and it's a great monologue. And it's kind of perfect because it's about a page long and there's lots of pauses. But I mean, Robert Shaw, so supposedly Robert Shaw, I don't know if he was method acting or whether he was just using it as an excuse to get drunk. But apparently the first time they did this, he was drunk. And he started off well and then fell off script pretty fast and started talking about his garden in England and all kinds of things. And Spielberg went, okay, let's stop for the day. And then a very kind of a shamefaced Robert Shaw phoned Spielberg at 2 a.m. that night and said, really sorry, let me have another go because this is so important. And he was terrified he was going to get cut out of the film. They were just going to move on and not do it. And Spielberg says the next day basically is the one you see in the film. Robert Shaw just did it straight off. And which I think is, respect to Spielberg for realizing, I need that in the film as well.
Right.
Japanese submarine slammed 2 torpedoes into our side, Chief. He was coming back from the island of Tinian to Leyte, just delivered the bomb, the Hiroshima bomb. 1,100 men went into the water. The vessel went down in 12 minutes. Didn't see the first shark for about half an hour. Tiger, 13-footer, you know that when you're in the water, Chief? You tell by looking from the dorsal to the tail. What we didn't know was our bomb mission had been so secret, no distress signal had been sent. They didn't even list us overdue for a week. Very first light, Chief. Sharks come cruising. So we formed ourselves into tight groups. It's kind of like old squares in a battle, like you see in a calendar, like the Battle of Waterloo, and the idea was, shark comes to the nearest man, that man he start pounding and hollering and screaming. Sometimes the shark would go away. Sometimes he wouldn't go away. Sometimes that shark, he looks right into you, right into your eyes. The thing about a shark, he's got lifeless eyes, black eyes, like a doll's eyes. When he comes at you, he doesn't seem to be living until he bites you, and those black eyes roll over white, and then you hear that terrible high-pitched screaming. The ocean turns red, and in spite of all the pounding and the hollering, they all come in and they rip you to pieces. By the end of that first dawn, lost 100 men. I don't know how many sharks, maybe 1,000. I don't know how many men, they average 6 an hour. On Thursday morning, Chief, I bumped into a friend of mine, Herbie Robinson from Cleveland. Baseball player, bosun's mate. I thought he was asleep. Reached over to wake him up. Bobbed up and down in the water. It was like a kind of top. Upended. Well, he'd been bitten in half below the waist. Noon the 5th day, Mr. Hooper, Lockheed Ventura. So he swung in low and he saw us. He was a young pilot, a lot younger than Mr. Hooper anyway. He saw us and he come in low, and 3 hours later a big fat PBY comes down and started to pick us up. That was the time I was most frightened, waiting for my turn. I'll never put on a life jacket again. So 1,100 men went in the war. 316 men come out. The Sharks took the rest, June the 29th, 1945. Anyway, we delivered the bomb.
Yeah.
It's so effective, and you don't usually see that much in films where they just leave the camera on someone to just monologue like that. But it's riveting.
Yeah.
Like, you can't look away from it, and it's just him talking.
Yeah.
And it's so well shot too, because Dreyfuss is in the background being like, he's also riveted, like he's being really quiet and invested, so the focus is totally on him. But then the story is incredible, and it's true.
Yeah. Well, it's just the fact that as soon as Brody says, "What's that on your arm?" and Quint says, "Oh, that's the tattoo I got removed. It was the Indianapolis." And you can see, Brady doesn't know what that means. So he's kind of just still grinning. And then you just see kind of Dreyfus go, like shit, because he's obviously studied that. And and just the music as well. You get a little bit of John Williams there, where it's like, I think after he says, I bumped into a friend of mine who was bobbing up and down too high in the water, and his legs have been bitten off. And the music behind him just goes, it's like, it's so good. It's so good. It's like terrifying.
Yeah.
And it totally makes you understand Quinn and why he's so obsessed,
Yeah, it's so one of the this is how basically the public knows about the Indianapolis, but it also had only been declassified like 5 years before this movie was shot. So, you're only 30 years off of the end of World War II by the time this movie is released. But yeah, it's a hell of a monologue, and I wish sometimes, that's something that would not be unusual to see in a play, right? You'd have the moment where the character is going to, through some story, explain themselves. And, usually the light turns down to a single, shaft of light or whatever, and all the other actors, hold kind of in freeze while they tell their story. And it kind of has that impact. And it's you can see, Shaw was a very, very talented guy, and kind of him bringing some of that old school acting chops of not just, I can do a quick quip and in front of the camera, and because all my takes are about 4 seconds long, which is how they make movies now. And being able to sustain a scene like that and really dig in. And so I'm not surprised he tried it both ways. I bet Spielberg though wished he knew we're going to do this over two different attempts. We're going to switch the order and see what happens.
And I also love how while he's doing it, the barrel pops up outside the boat, which kind of shows that, because a lot of people have said, this shark's too clever and too evil. I kind of agree with that a little bit, but you've got to remember it's also based on, I think it's called Close to the Shore, which is a good book. Definitely, totally recommend reading it, about the Jersey shark attacks in 1916, which actually Dreyfus mentions earlier in the film when they're trying to convince the mayor. But yeah, basically a week that summer, a shark kind of swam up a river, 11 miles up a river, and attacked 5 people in 1916. And of course, back then, they hadn't really had any shark attacks. So you had these, farm boys running to the police and going, my friend just got eaten. And they, the police were like, buy a fish don't eat people, which, prolonged it. Occasionally sharks do this. Although I know in recent years before he died, Peter Benchley backtracked enormously and was like, I feel really bad the damage I've done to sharks. And actually they're quite peaceful creatures. And if they do attack people, it's normally a mistake, Because I'm sure every idiot with a boat or canoe went out shark hunting after Jaws came out. You know what I mean?
Oh, they still. We've had major shark depopulation in the years since these movies come out. It's considered to be a problem because they are the apex predator, and if you don't have that going on, you have major other ecological problems. But yeah, it's led to all this stuff of us having Shark Week every summer, which I think it's probably about to start, would be my guess.
Yeah, Discovery. I think it's the end of July, early August.
And, when I grew up, we went to the library every, week or two. And I'd say we were checking out the same shark books because the children's section only had so many. But shark books all the time. And we would just, sit there and look. And a lot of the illustrations you see as they're going through books, kind of learning it. Because now, of course, that would be people looking at Google a movie. But, they're going through, all these books about sharks. And that's very similar to the kind of stuff we check out. And then this is also kind of the era of the Jacques Cousteau thing had kind of blew up in the US. And every kid kind of had this idea of sea adventure, which I don't think kids necessarily have anymore in quite the same way. They have too many Yu-Gi-Ohs and other things to be excited about, which I don't blame them for.
Yeah.
It was kind of a different era. One of the things that we didn't really talk. You talked about him scratching Quint scratching his nails on the chalkboard in that sequence.
Yeah, such a great intro, fantastic intro. Because they were going to have him in an earlier scene, which is a deleted scene where he just kind of goes into like a shop and asks for some like fishing wire, and it's a nice little scene because it shows that he's not totally isolated. And I think he asked the girl behind the counter when her baby's due, so it shows he's not a real, dick that just lives on his boat drunk all the time. He does talk to people, but at the same time, what an intro!
Yeah. I do want to know who the little guy is with the dog who's hanging out with him. Like, you never hear that guy's story. That guy's got a story.
I guess that's his first mate who's sensible enough not to come on this trip.
He's the smartest person in this movie.
But it's kind of good how he just cuts kind of through the bullshit of the council. Mm-hmm. And he's even smirking when he kind of goes, "Ladies and gentlemen, like, I don't believe that at all. I don't respect any of you." I think he's got a little bit of respect for Brody, and I think that because even on the boat, it you can read it different ways, but I like how Hooper has that big go at Brody. Great foreshadowing as well about the tanks. If you mess with these tanks, they're going to blow up. Mm-hmm. And Quint's like, "Hey chief, next time just ask me which rope you have to pull." So he's kind of like, he knows he doesn't know anything, but he's trying, kind of.
Yeah. He gives Hooper so much more shit than he does.
Yeah, it's an interesting interesting look at masculinity, right? I mean, it's class as well. Mm-hmm. It feels weirdly really familiar in a way if you know a certain kind of guy. Like, they're actually you'll hear people say like, oh, that guy's an asshole, and underneath he's actually kind of okay, and no, it's like sometimes you just meet there's people who are just, they're aggressive, they kind of poke and prod to kind of see where people are at, and then they kind of deal with them at whatever level they're at. But they're definitely gonna, like, people who they think are a bit of a poser or whatever, they're going to definitely give way more crap to. And
it's also, if you've been to college, it's like, oh, college boy, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah. He's also filthy rich.
Yeah.
So that doesn't help, I'm sure.
But then, I mean, Benchley, I'm assuming those characters were, true to how Benchley did them, but it's a really interesting idea to put those two kinds of characters together, of this guy who could have been shaken out of the pages of Moby Dick, compared to, the heading into the, science, we're now in the middle of the scientific age, and what does that actually look like, and what kind of person can afford to be a scientist?
Well, it's also interesting what you say about the Benchley novel, because Spielberg made them all, even Quint, likable, which I've read the Jaws novel a couple of times, but they're all kind of dicks in it. Even Brody's kind of a dick in it. And you just don't really care what happens to them. Because I think in the book, Hooper has an affair with Brody's wife, and it's very soap opera-ish, but like also, all these people are pretty unlikable. Whereas, Spielberg, partly by the casting, but I think partly the direction and what they did with the script as well. It's like they kind of make them, you kind of become a bit of a cheerleader for all of them, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In that town hall sequence, one of the things I just love, and it's like 2 lines, because the lady pops up, I think, in like 3 different sequences, but she's the motel owner.
Oh yeah.
And she's like, I think I speak for a lot of people in this town. And you're like, that is every town hall meeting that has ever occurred has that person sitting in the front row.
I do also like the reporter that shows up when, they're having 4th of July, it's open, but then all of the news organizations have descended because they want to be there in case shark, carnage does happen. But this is just goofy guy who's just droning on and on. He's like, a cloud in the shape of a killer shark. I mean,
well, actually, Jamie, you know who that is? That's Peter Benchley. That's Peter Benchley. Really? Yeah.
I did not know that.
That's his little cameo.
That's hilarious.
Because you watch it, I was watching it yesterday, I'm like, he's so wooden. And I'm like, he just about gets away with it because he's supposed to be like a TV anchor.
Yeah,
like a news anchor. But he's like, yes, this beautiful resort.
I mean, he's kind of pitch perfect for like a local reporter. I mean, it works.
Yeah. Well, it's good. I mean, I think this is the great thing about this film. Even the characters you don't really get to know anything about, like Ben Gardner, who you only briefly see when he helps Hooper off the boat onto the quay. And then, of course, after that, because he's almost like the second best fisherman in Amity after Quint. And, which the fact that he gets killed off shows the strength of the shark or whatever. But also, that guy, you could easily, I'm sure has an interesting background, And there's so many characters like that you kind of want to know more about. But, there's just not enough time.
The one I said to Jamie as the movie was going, when you see that first mate character of Quint's, was like, I want to know that guy's story. And then there's just this shot of this like kind of doofy looking guy who's like the harbor master.
Yeah, with his cereal.
And I was like, that's where I want to be in 20 years. With my pipe and kind of just wandering out looking confused. That's what I'm going to do.
Well, yeah, I don't know. Jamie, do you have anything else?
I think we covered everything that I have written down. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I haven't seen it enough so that I haven't memorized. And every time I watch it, I'm like, gosh, that's such a good movie. Yeah. I mean, like, mentally I know it's good, but it impresses me every time I see it.
Yeah.
Actually, an interesting thing I forgot to mention was, so it's definitely aged. It looks old to me now, sadly, because for a while, I grew up in a seaside town, and for a while it was very contemporary. And I was like, whoa, it's a bit like Jaws. I live by the beach. I swim in the sea. But then suddenly, I guess around the late 90s, it suddenly aged and started looking like an old Hitchcock film. So you kind of got more distance from it. But, Spielberg was a huge Hitchcock fan. And I read this yesterday that he tried to meet Hitchcock a few times. And Hitchcock wouldn't see him, kind of barred him from set and, wouldn't come out. Even though, his assistant kept saying, there's, Steven Spielberg's here, he really wants to meet you. And, the assistant said to Hitchcock, why won't you meet him? He's a huge fan. He just wants to sit at your feet and listen to some stories. And Hitchcock said, well, I kind of feel embarrassed because I got paid $1 million for doing the voiceover for the Jaws ride in Florida. So I'm basically a whore to that fish movie, and I don't want to meet the person who made it.
Have either one of you been on the Jaws?
No, I'd love to. Oh God, I'd love to.
This is, by the way, the second podcast where it'll be released first, where we talk about the Universal rides.
Oh my God, I'm sorry. So this was back in 1987 when they had a Universal tour, and it's probably still there in LA. So my family did that, and that was the Jaws was part of it. It wasn't just exclusively a Jaws ride or whatever. They also had like the King Kong part, and they had Earthquake. It was pretty neat, but I mean, it's it's a fake shark. It's really not that scary, but you kind of wonder, like, is this the same quality of shark that they actually used in the movie? It probably is, because at that point it was 12 years after the actual.
I think they used the same mold. I read they used exactly the same mold, but I guess they didn't texture it as much or bother painting it as well. If you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Because I'm always like a bit disgruntled, and I was even the first time I saw Jaws, or when I first talked about it as a kid, because like even my friends at school, at elementary school, were like, "Whoa, the shark looked false," and I'm like, "How close have you been to a shark that size?" Plus, I think it looks pretty big. Good. I mean, the only bit that's a bit dodgy is when it jumps on the back of the boat, but that's always going to look a bit dodgy, I think, in a pre-CGI world. And of course now, from Deep Blue Sea, it would be, doing backflips and moving way too fast.
Right.
But I love the fact that even though, it can basically just only go straight, when it goes under the orca, it looks amazing, I think. When Brody shoots it, blood comes out. you know?
I'm not bothered in the slightest by the effects in this movie. I mean, yes, if you're looking for them, you can tell, but it doesn't affect my takeaway at all.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's like watching, well, like one of the King Kong, well, maybe not the 70s King Kong, but the 33 King Kong, where, you know, you just kind of get pulled into it and it's like, I'm accepting this, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I know it's got jowls so they could get the jaw to actually move on a hinge and all that good stuff, and without it, like the rubber folding. And there's by the way, tons of, I'm not telling Simon this, he knows this. There's tons of documentaries out there that are actually pretty good. We watched one of them back to back with Jaws about 10 years ago at the Ritz.
The shark is not working.
Yes.
Yeah.
Look for it. It's really, really good. I don't want to go too much into how the special effects worked for this because that just covers it much, much better. It does have interviews with, surviving cast members and stuff like that. Roy Scheider, unfortunately, passed really young.
I think skin cancer, wasn't it? Because he sunned himself too much, I think.
Yeah.
Dreyfuss is still kicking around.
Yeah, so I know Stewart has paid to see Dreyfuss give talks, and he apparently just has like an evening with Richard Dreyfuss, and you go in and like they sell Jaws merch out front and stuff, and then he just apparently just talks at the audience about whatever's on his mind for like an hour, which apparently does not go over particularly well. And he's like, I don't care, you guys paid to see Richard Dreyfuss, I am him. So you can ask Stuart more about that, but I love the idea that this guy is just like, whatever, I don't know what you thought you were getting. This is who I am. So
I don't think he's acting anymore, so that must be what he's doing.
Yeah, he's retired a couple of times.
So Richard Dreyfuss is a great advert for, I guess, not doing drugs, because up to about 1980, when he was making films, and in Jaws he looks about 20. And then I guess he had problems and didn't really work for about 4 years. And when he came back in the mid kind of like 80s, he suddenly looks about 50 years old. His hair's gone totally grey. So I'm like, yeah, but at least he got out of there. I'm like, Belushi. So
right. Yeah, no, that's one of the things that's also funny to me about this movie, just kind of tangentially related, is everyone's talking about their kids and they all have these young children. And I'm like, life was just harder in the 60s and 70s because all of these people with young children all look like they're like 50 years old.
Yeah.
They all have, they all, too much sun. It's just.
I was noticing like the mom in the.
Mrs.
Kenton, sorry.
Yeah.
She looks to me like she's in her 50s. And I was like, well, I mean, I guess that could work to have like a 9 or 10-year-old. Then I looked her up. She's like 47.
In that film?
Yeah, in that movie. So, yeah.
A lot of it has to do with how people dress and wear their hair and kind of where you think of them being at that age. And we all hang on to our fashion year after year. So
that's a really good point, though, Jamie, because I feel like that makes it sadder when she confronts Brody on the pier, because it's almost like you can kind of tell her and her husband are definitely in their early 50s. And they probably had him, very late. And it's like, that's kind of game over for them, really.
Yeah, and it's an only child. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
So, I guess before we finish, what about the ending? What do we think about the ending? I love it, even though as Peter Benchley, so Peter Benchley eventually got thrown off the set, I think, by Spielberg, because I think he was being too annoying. And Peter Benchley said, the end's really stupid. That wouldn't happen if you shot a canister of air. You just get a bullet hole in it. Nothing would happen. And Spielberg goes, it doesn't matter because I've spent the whole film getting the audience and I'm just going to keep them just for that bit and they'll go with it. And he was totally true. He was totally right.
I think it's great. I mean, physics aside, the tension of him just continuing to fire shot after shot after shot. And then there's just like 1 in a million shot and he gets it. Like it's just brilliant.
I don't entirely understand why they didn't just decide like there was a propane tank for some reason on the boat, which would have had the exact same effect but would have exploded. I am fine with it, but now honestly, when I watch it, the Mythbusters TV show did an episode on what happens when you shoot a tank, And they because the way the Mythbusters worked after about the third season was, we're going to try whatever's in the movie, and then we're going to try and see what we can do to make whatever happened in the movie happen.
Is it possible?
Yeah, like if we throw a stick of dynamite at the the tank, will it explode? What do we have to do to make this effect actually work? And they, of course, when they shot it with a rifle in a contained space, it just did what you would expect. It just kind of hissed out.
I don't know if you guys have watched the movie, is it 21 Jump Street? But they have a joke about that where they keep shooting at the petrol tanks of cars. And they keep going, it's supposed to explode. It's not doing it.
We just watched that movie.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think I don't mind at all. I mean, it's also something I bought into, in like high school. So I don't know how to backpedal from buying into it. So.
Somebody yesterday, I totally don't believe this, but somebody yesterday had a comment where they were like, if you look carefully before Dreyfus goes down in the cage, Quint's prepared another air tank. Well, obviously Dreyfus isn't going to need that. So they were saying, is Quint trying to build some kind of device that might blow up the shark? I don't believe that myself. But
I think that's probably a screw up in editing if he's putting more tanks out. So
yeah. Yeah.
I mean, why would he even have scuba tank anyway? But
it just works so well. It's like kill the beast, and the fact that it was years. So I recorded this off TV when I was a kid, and then it was years before. I think 1995 was when I first had the anniversary 20-year video copy, my first proper copy of Jaws, and so I was finally seeing it, as it should be seen, and that was the first time I ever realized that Brody was like saying, show me the tank, blow up, because I guess my TV version, they put the sound down too low on the filter or whatever, so I never heard that. So I was like, that's even cooler.
The thing that I'd say, talking about the very end there, they start kind of relieving the tension even before he shoots the tank rather, because they start playing the sea shanty song again, like the adventure song, as he's climbing the mast.
Yeah.
I find a really interesting choice of like giving you hope again at this point.
Yeah. If you don't have that music, it looks really grim right then. That boat is going down. The shark is still pissed. Well,
it's also like, it's kind of the same thing as at the end of Jaws 2 as well, where he's really lucky the shark's coming in exactly the direction he wants it to, because if it came up behind him, he'd be screwed. But it's like, it's got a nice long run up straight towards him.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's kind of cool because the boat is still sinking. It's going down pretty fast. But yeah, it's just great. And then, you have the small little code with the end with Dreyfus popping up. And like you said earlier, Ryan, they kind of like the joke, I always used to hate the water. I have no idea why. So Spielberg, I'm glad somebody stopped him doing this. Spielberg said he wants to put a bunch of shark fins on the horizon at the end of the film.
Oh, no.
I don't know if that was just a joke. I hope that was a joke on his part. But it's perfect ending, finished, You kind of see in the credits that they get back to the shore because, they're pretty much there. So it's perfect.
And then they had to go and make like 10 sequels. Couldn't leave well enough alone.
We need to do Jaws 2. I was thinking, you ever seen Jaws 2, have you?
I have never seen it.
No, I'd love to do it. I was thinking that last night.
And it is probably the only watchable Jaws sequel. So
the reason I was thinking about it last night is the guy who directed Kong Lives is the same guy who directed Jaws 2 and Supergirl. So he's the king of sequels. No one really asked for.
And Somewhere in Time, he did.
And Somewhere in Time, right. The movie that I really liked the first time, and then I tried to show it to Jamie. I was like, I have no idea. This movie's so slow. So I think I was just like, oh, Jane Seymour, heart goes pitter-patter, and that was about as far as my brain went. But
if you want to see Christopher Reeve looking sad for 2 hours, that's your film, baby.
Bad in Michigan. Yeah. Anyway, but yeah, Jaws. I mean, there's so much more out there about this. We would never be able to cover everything you could potentially cover about Jaws. I
almost forgot. I meant to ask you, Simon, to talk about. I know you've seen the Rolling Roadshow of Jaws in the water several times. What is that experience like?
So basically, you guys know me. I love Jaws. I've got Jaws shower curtain. I've got Jaws clock. That same summer I bought the video for the first time in '95 when I was at college. I also took I think it was the Woolworths at the time, of giving me the poster for it. So I had this big Jaws poster, which I think my college girlfriend wasn't that happy about, on our wall for a year. So I love Jaws, and then I managed to see it once in England on the big screen. And I came over here, and I've seen it a couple of 4th of Julys actually at the Alamo. But then I finally went to Jaws in the Water, which I think they've been doing for 10 years now.
That sounds right.
And they moved the location a couple of times. So basically, Jaws in the Water there's a big screen at the end of this lake, and they show the movie at night once it gets dark, and you float around on rubber rings. And they also hire some divers to grab you. Well, when I did it, it was fun. You know, I was floating around drinking my beer, my rubber ring. Unfortunately, my girlfriend at the time got a puncture in her rubber ring, who were Mrs., and had to kind of like paddle off and change it. And we didn't think about this, but she got totally lost. I didn't see it to the end of the film. Should have gone with her. So I basically watched Jaws by myself. I also went a few days into this. So I think you've got to watch it. You want to go the first couple of days, because I think everybody urinates in the lake, basically.
Oh, God.
And also, for some reason, they didn't have the divers when I did it. They were like sick or something. But it was still really cool, watching Jaws floating around with a bunch of Jaws fans that night was great fun. Yeah, I recommend it. I think they've hiked up the price since I did it. I think when I did it, it was about $10 or $15, and now it's like something like 30 or 40. And they give you I think they make you buy a rubber ring now, whereas when I did it, you just hired it. But I mean, I would still recommend it. I mean, especially these days, when it looks like we're never going to do anything like that again. If they ever do it again,
if you get the chance. Yeah, our friend Matt is a scuba diver, and he did that one year.
He was one of the people.
Yeah, yanking.
He was.
Yeah.
See, I was a bit relieved they didn't have, because they did tell us they didn't have them at the start of it, and I was a bit relieved.
That would be a deal breaker for me.
I think it might have annoyed me, or actually genuinely made me jump, which I think probably would have been funny in retrospect. By the time, I think would have really pissed me off. But no, I mean, definitely floating around with a bunch of Jaws. I mean, it's like this is what I miss about going to a movie theatre. It's that sense of everybody, especially with an old film. It's that sense of everybody. Everybody loves the film, so you get big reactions to all the points in it. And I think that's what because of the coronavirus, that's what we're kind of missing at the moment. We're watching all films by ourselves. And it's not the same. So that was good. I recommend, if you haven't done it, you should try at least once. But go the first couple of days before everybody has peed in the water, I think.
Truly, there is danger in the water.
Right. Don't drink the water.
Yeah, no, we've not gotten to do that. I've gotten to see it on the big screen at least once with you, maybe twice. I've lost track. We've been to a few movies together, so it all kind of blurs.
Just a couple.
But yeah, I mean, I am half thinking of our neighbors across the street have a pool, and they've been letting us swim in it a little bit.
Yeah.
And they have an inflatable screen, so I think I'm going to bring our copy of Jaws over and say, "Here you go, Joel. Go. Here's what you can do for your 4th of July." So.
Yeah, I mean, I think since 1995, I've literally watched this every summer, and it's almost like the movie I put on to start my summer. And of course, since I've lived here the last 13 years, that's probably ramped up even more to the fact that, 4th of July, you got to watch it before the 4th of July, really.
Yeah, we'll be releasing this before the 4th of July for sure. So people will be reminded to go out and watch Jaws.
Yeah, just don't go to the beach, though. Don't go to the beach.
Do not. Something else. And it's not in the water. It's get away from me. All right. Well, thanks so much, y'all. This has been a total blast, and it was great to give me an excuse to watch Jaws even earlier this summer than normal. Usually we put it on, if not by the 4th of July, on the 4th of July. So
can I just say
well, happy Jaws, Simon.
Happy Jaws to you. And see you again soon.
See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.
That about wraps it up for this edition of The Signal Watch, a production of the League of Melbotus. Thanks for sticking with us. If you enjoyed this podcast, we invite you to drop on by the Signal Watch blog, where you'll find write-ups of a wide variety of movies and more. You can drop comments on this podcast and let us know what you think. We do have a Signal Watch Patreon, and if you're so moved, we'd most certainly appreciate your support. We'll be back soon with more exceedingly high-quality content. So, until next time, God damn it, babies. You've got to be kind.